What's up everybody, and welcome back to another game review on Lethal Games. Today we're taking a look at Rock of Ages 2, which is definitely a unique game that doesn't necessarily fit into any single genre. It's a mixture of a racing game with elements of tower defense, but instead of cars, you're racing boulders. On top of the gameplay, you also have some historical satire mixed in. The easiest way for you to understand exactly what this game is about is to watch some gameplay footage, which we will get into that in just a second. Rock of Ages 2 may not be the flashiest of games or even appealing at first sight, but that doesn't mean that this isn't a fun title. Let's find out if Rock of Ages 2 is worth your time and money. The first thing you'll probably notice is the graphics. The game uses a classical art style reminiscent of paintings and sculptures of old and is animated with a stop motion like style. It's not something that's flashy or pleasing to the eyes, but considering that the game revolves around going through the ages and battling famous historical figures in a match of boulder rolling, it does fit the theme. When you're actually in the game though, the graphics look surprisingly good. When I first saw screenshots of the game, I wasn't too impressed, but once you load into the actual game, it looks really good. There's a mixture of 2D cardboard cutout elements in a 3D environment along with some fantastic lighting effects. It gives you the sense that you're inside a painting. Colored me impressed. You can take a look on screen and decide if you like this kind of visual direction yourself. The game features some short cutscenes before each match in the story mode that introduces historical figures you're about to face. The humor feels kind of over the top and forced at times, and I'm not a big fan of it at all. But you can ignore the stuff pretty easily if you don't care for it. These cutscenes only appear before each match and can be skipped entirely. When you enter the story campaign, you'll be greeted with this map. Towers represent opponents that you haven't defeated yet, and you may also have noticed these other wooden signs. These are defensive structures that I can add to my own arsenal, and I simply have to roll over them to collect it. I kind of have mixed feelings about this because I feel like the game lacks a sense of progression, and having a shop that sells new structures or items would be a great way to introduce that progression. As it stands now, these structures are pretty easily obtainable and doesn't feel rewarding at all. What I do like about this map interface is the fact that you are free to roam around and tackle opponents in any order you choose within reason. As you can see, there are some places that are gated by the amount of stars you've earned. Each level has a couple of different difficulties to choose from, and beating the default difficulty will earn you 1 star. After you decide on an opponent, you can enter the game lobby. Here you can choose which boulders you'd like to take into the game and the structures you'd like to use for the current match. You only have a limited number of slots available, so it adds another small layer of strategy to the game. Certain types of boulders and structures definitely have an advantage over others in certain maps. Gameplay wise is where it gets kind of interesting. The basic goal of each match is this: you take control of a boulder and guide it down an obstacle course, at the end of which is your opponent's castle. Your opponent will do the same on a separate but identical obstacle course, and the first one to break down the castle door and smash the leader wins. Both players also start with some gold, and you can build obstacles to make the course more difficult for your enemy. This is where the tower defense elements come in. Both players start with some gold, and you can build extra obstacles and defensive structures that do damage to the opponent's boulders. These range from things like springboards to sticky cows to all sorts of wacky things. You're not restricted to placing items only at the beginning of the match, and you can build it at any time, even as your opponent is rolling down the course. The catch is that once you build on a particular spot, you can't build on the same spot again. There's also a limit of how many of each structure you're allowed to build each match, so you can't just flood the map with structures, and it's often better to spread out the structures strategically through each run. You won't be taking down your opponent's castle in one attempt, so you'll be rolling down the same course multiple times, which adds more depth to your structure timing and placements. The amount of damage you do to your opponent is dependent on your boulder. There's a bunch of different rocks you can unlock which has stats that differ between speed, strength, acceleration, and even some with special abilities. These are linked to the physics of the game because the faster you roll towards your opponent's gate, the more damage you'll do. Though it's not always the best idea to travel as fast as you can because you can easily lose control and roll off the cliff, losing valuable time. In addition, your speed and weight also plays into how effective your opponent's obstacles are. If you're rolling down at full speed, a stone wall isn't going to do much to slow you down, but it will still chip away at your health pool. If your opponent was particularly good at damaging your boulder, they can significantly reduce the force of impact on the gate at the end of the trail. And if they manage to completely destroy the boulder, then you'll do no damage at all. This is the main gameplay loop, and if this sounds appealing to you, then you'll most likely enjoy the game. One of the best parts of Rock of Ages 2 is the physics. The boulders feel heavy, and you can really experience the acceleration and the speed as you're tumbling down the hills watching the environment fly by. And when you come across those pesky obstacles, physics dictates that if you have the weight and speed on your side, then you'll most likely smash through those things, and that's exactly what happens. All obstacles in the game your opponent builds is destructible, though you will take some damage and decelerate when you do. Mechanically and technically, the game plays great and it's actually pretty fun, but it's not without its issues. I'll start off with the most annoying thing about the game, and that's the downtime between rolls. After you finish a course once, there's a significant timer before you can roll again. This time is used to build more obstacles in preparation for the next run, but I often find myself with ample time remaining after I build my structures, and I'm usually just sitting there waiting for the next turn. I'd love it if there was some option to skip this wait time once you're ready, but since this is a real-time racing game, your opponent may actually still be on the previous run while you're waiting, and this downtime between runs actually plays into the race. And I can't think of a solution to this problem without fundamentally changing the way the race works. I will admit that you will end up building more structures between runs as you progress through the levels, so the downtime may seem shorter in certain scenarios, but it's definitely still there. Another thing I disliked was the general humor, or at least their attempt at humor with this game. It's done pretty crudely in my opinion. Here's an example of one of the cutscenes. Obviously, this stuff is pretty subjective and you may enjoy this type of humor, so your mileage may vary. Rock of Ages 2 actually surprised me a bit. At first, I didn't like the game that much, but as I got over the learning curve and learned how to properly control my boulder, things got easier and the game kind of grew on me. Though at the end of the day, this is a casual arcade style game, and I think Ace Team did a good job with fleshing out the mechanics and bringing to life a pretty original idea. The result is a very polished title, but even with all that said, this isn't a type of game that I'm personally into, and I think it'll only appeal to a very specific player base. For that reason, I found myself having a difficult time trying to figure out who I would recommend this game to. I honestly can't give a blanket recommendation to any sort of player or relate it to any game I've played before, and the best suggestion I have is to take a look at the gameplay yourself and decide if this is something that interests you. If it is, then go for it, because aside from the quirkiness and the weird genre, this is actually a pretty solid game. Thank you guys for checking out my review, and if you liked the video, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for more content in the future. I've got a lot of interesting stuff planned in the upcoming months, so stay tuned for that. You can also find me on Twitter for channel updates, gaming news, and game deals. Link to that down below. That's all for me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.